how do you strike that balance? You know, that really delicate balance between a legislature needing its own internal discipline, but also its fundamental duty to represent the people who actually elected them.
It's a core tension, isn't it, in almost any democracy?
Exactly. And right now, the Nigerian Senate is... Well, it's grappling with this very publicly. So today, we're doing a deep dive into the Nigerian Senate's recent push for tougher disciplinary measures against its own members. We'll be drawing on reporting from places like Premium Times, Sahara Reporters, really trying to unpack what's driving this, the legal complexities, and, you know, what does it all mean for representation and the rule of law in Nigeria?
And our mission here really is to get beyond just the headlines. We want to give you a fuller picture of how the current laws, these proposed changes, and some really key court rulings are shaping parliamentary conduct, shaping accountability in, well, one of Africa's biggest democracies.
It's about how power works when different branches clash.
Precisely. Understanding those mechanisms.
Okay, so let's break down what the Senate is actually proposing. They're looking at more stringent disciplinary sanctions for members. It's through a specific bill, the Legislative House's Powers and Privileges Act Amendment Bill 2025, and that's already passed its first reading.
Which means it's formally on the table now, introduced, ready for debate.
Right. And the sponsor is Senator Kakashehu from Borno Central. The bill's goals seem pretty clear. Tougher penalties for misconduct, streamlining the discipline process.
Taking it faster, maybe.
Yeah, and ensuring specific offenses get specific defined punishments. Sort of taking out the need for long debates. We're setting up special committees each time. More decisive action seems to be the aim.
And, you know, this push for tougher, clearer penalties, it really sets the stage for the legal challenge we need to talk about. This isn't happening in a vacuum.
No, definitely not.
There's a big public debate in Nigeria right now about legislative discipline, especially after a very recent court ruling that really brought everything to a head.
And that leads us straight into the specific case, the landmark case, really, the suspension of Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan. She's from Kogi Central.
PDP, Kogi Central.
Right. And she was suspended for 6 months back in March 2025. The Senate's official reason was alleged misconduct during a plenary session. Specifically, they said she refused to move to a new seat assigned to her. They saw it as insubordination.
But it's important to add, and our sources highlight this, the suspension also came after she publicly accused the Senate President, Godswill Akpabio, of sexual harassment.
No.
And that accusation reportedly sparked outrage within the legislature. So that context is, it's significant. It certainly colored the atmosphere.
Definitely adds another layer. Her suspension itself came from a recommendation by the Senate Committee on Ethics, Privileges, and Public Petitions.
The standard procedure, ostensibly.
But Senator Akpoti-Uduaghan didn't just accept it. She took it to court.
And that's where things got really interesting. Justice Binta Nyako, Federal High Court in Abuja, she delivered a pretty pivotal ruling.
What did she say?
Declared the 6-month suspension excessive and unlawful. Just flat out.
Excessive and unlawful. Wow.
Yeah. And the court's reasoning was crucial. Suspending an elected senator for that long, 6 months. The court said that's basically like denying her entire constituency representation for a whole legislative year.
So it wasn't just about the senator. It was about her constituents being silenced.
Exactly. The ruling wasn't just, a personal win for her. It fundamentally pushes back on how far parliamentary self-discipline can go.
Yeah.
It sets a judicial boundary.
So the court basically said, look, you can discipline your members, Senate, but you can't do it in a way that effectively disenfranchises voters for half a year.
Precisely. And they pointed to specific laws to back it up.
Which ones?
Section 21 of the Legislative House's Powers and Privileges Act. That section explicitly limits any suspension of a lawmaker to a maximum of 14 legislative days.
14 days, not 6 months.
Not 6 months.
Okay.
And a minimum of 1 day. And then there's Section 14 of the same act, which reinforces that constituents must not be denied representation.
So the legal basis was quite clear.
Very clear. These sections really form the bedrock here, showing that legislative power isn't absolute. It has constitutional limits.
So what was the practical outcome? The court ordered her immediate recall.
Immediate recall, full reinstatement. All her legislative rights, entitlements, privileges restored.
And beyond her specific case, what was the judge's wider point?
Justice Nyako sent a powerful message. Legislative suspensions can't just override constitutional guarantees. They can't be used to, potentially silence dissent. It really raises questions about that balance of power, doesn't it, between the legislature and the judiciary. It's a reminder that even internal parliamentary rules have to fit within the bigger constitutional picture.
And didn't the court also suggest the Senate should, update its own rules?
Yes, it did. Recommended the Senate review and revise its internal disciplinary rules, make sure they're fair, proportionate, and actually align with democratic principles.
Okay, so a clear win for Senator Akpoti-Uduaghan on the suspension front. But then there was a twist, right?
Ah, yes, the twist. This is where it gets really layered. Because even though she won on the suspension issue, the same court found her guilty of civil contempt.
Civil contempt? For what?
It was related to a Facebook post she made. A satirical post, apparently, on April 27th, 2025. And crucially, this was while her lawsuit against the Senate suspension was still ongoing.
Okay. So the court said that post violated an earlier order.
Exactly. There was an order issued back on April 4th telling all parties involved, her, the Senate, not to make public statements about the case while it was pending.
I see.
And the court ruled. Her Facebook post broke that order. Now, the distinction is important. Civil contempt, not criminal. It's about disobeying a court order, not committing a crime per se.
Which explains the penalty.
Right. The judge didn't jail her. Instead, imposed a fine and $5 million and ordered her to publish a public apology.
Where?
In 2 national newspapers within 7 days and on her own Facebook page within 2 days.
That's still a pretty significant consequence for a Facebook post.
It is. And it was the Senate President, Akpabio, who filed that contempt application against her.
Interesting. And did her lawyer argue against it?
Oh, yes. Her lawyer argued the post wasn't even related to the suspension case, that it referred to those separate sexual harassment allegations she'd made.
That the judge didn't buy that.
No. The judge ruled it was directly connected to the ongoing suspension case and therefore violated the gag order. It really underscores how seriously courts take their orders.
And we should probably clarify for listeners, this contempt finding is totally separate from another legal issue she's facing, right? An ongoing cybercrime case.
Absolutely separate. Different case entirely. She's actually been granted bail on that one. So yeah, she's juggling multiple legal battles at the same time.
Wow. Okay, so bringing it back to the Senate's proposed bill and the suspension ruling. What's the reaction been? What happens next? Civil society must have weighed in.
Definitely. CRAP, the Socioeconomic Rights and Accountability Project, has been quite vocal.
What are they saying?
They've publicly called on Senate President Akpabio to immediately obey the court order. Get Senator Akpoti-Uduaghan back into the Senate smoothly.
Taking a strong stance.
Very strong. CRAP described her suspension as a blatant violation of the Nigerian Constitution, 1999, as amended in international human rights treaties. They're basically saying the Senate leadership needs to lead by example, uphold the rule of law, respect the court.
And the bill itself, the one proposing tougher discipline, where does that stand now, especially after this court ruling against the long suspension?
Well, despite the ruling, the bill is still moving forward. It's expected to go for its second reading soon, maybe in the coming weeks.
And that's where the main debate happens.
That's the big debate stage, yes. Senators will argue the merits, the potential implications.
Yeah.
And you have to imagine this recent court judgment will be a major part of that discussion now.
Right. And after second reading, if it passes that.
Then it typically goes to a committee. They'll hold public hearings, get input from experts, the public, other stakeholders.
Before maybe coming back for a final vote, the third reading.
Exactly. And if this bill does eventually pass, connecting it back to the bigger picture, the implications could be pretty significant.
How so?
Well, you see this tension, right? The legislature wants to assert its autonomy, its power to discipline itself. But the judiciary has just drawn a pretty clear line about the limits of that power, especially concerning representation.
So the bill passing could be seen as the Senate pushing back.
Potentially.
Yeah.
It could really impact not just how parliamentarians conduct themselves, but that whole framework of checks and balances, how these two branches, legislative and judicial, navigate this space after the judgment. That's going to be critical to watch. It affects democratic representation directly.
So we've really explored this core tension. The Nigerian Senate wanting stronger internal discipline, clashing with the courts, upholding constitutional limits, and crucially, protecting representation.
It's a classic democratic dilemma playing out very visibly.
So maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over.
What does this specific case, Senator Akpoti-Uduaghan's suspension and reinstatement, and the Senate's reaction with this proposed amendment, what does it all reveal about how checks and balances are evolving right now within a democracy like Nigeria's.
And maybe even broader, how could these events influence legislative bodies elsewhere? Other countries wrestling with similar issues, parliamentary discipline versus accountability versus representation.
Yeah, it's a fascinating real-time window into that constant push and pull of power and principle. Something to keep an eye on.